We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Planet Holyrood, the podcast that lifts the lid on Scottish politics and asks what's going on this week. I'm Chris McCall. I'm the Deputy Political Editor at the Daily Record, and I'm standing in as host as Paul Hutchin is currently on a train somewhere in the north of England as he returns from the Labour conference in Liverpool. Now, joining me today in the Glasgow studio as my distinguished guests are Mark Smith, Head of News at the Daily Record, and Ben Borland, the editor of the Scottish Daily Express. We'll kick off this week by briefly looking back at the Labour conference and the escalating political bunfight between Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage. And later on, we'll ask two of the big questions in Scottish politics, that being, should Michelle Mone be booted out of the House of Lords? And is it time for a ban on mobile phones in schools? But before we get to that excitement, let's look at Keir Starmer's big moment yesterday in Liverpool, Ben. Now, he said in his conference speech that Nigel Farage is a, quote, snake oil merchant and someone who does not believe in Britain. Is he right?
Well, I think there's two set. Well, I mean, there were two of many insults and barbs that were hurled in his direction. I mean, the one thing you can take from Starmer's speech is that he's not worried about Kemi Badenoch and the Tories.
Absolutely not. One mention of the Conservatives.
I think it was one mention. He is entirely focused on reform and Farage. I mean, I think there's two separate things there. Is he a snake oil salesman? I think his critics could fairly describe him as that. You know, that's someone who's kind of seen as quite slippery and will say what people want to hear.
Crook, a scumbag.
I don't think,
that
I don't think that's the same thing. But but
a liar.
Is he? I don't think he's a liar. I don't think he's a crook. I think you could describe him as a snake oil salesman if you were sort of taking a critical view of him. Does he? I think his exact term was he's an enemy of British renewal, which I'm not even sure what that means. I don't agree. I don't think Nigel Farage or reform is against the renewal of Britain.
I think the point the PM was trying to make was that you never hear Nigel Farage say anything positive about Britain. All he does is say, "Oh, there's a lot of bad things about the place."
Well, there are a lot of bad things, and a lot of them are due to Keir Starmer and the kind of disastrous, absolutely catastrophic start to government that he's made. And you know, if Farage is an enemy of the people or whatever, it's because Starmer's made him one. Reform weren't anywhere at this time last year or in the general election. They weren't not anywhere, but they weren't on course to become the next government.
I mean, Starmer, though, I thought it was a great speech. Barnstormer. Thought he had the hall behind him. I think a lot of people in the country would have looked at that speech and thought, you know what, Labour's done better than we maybe thought. Whether or not he's the right man to lead Labour in the next election remains to be seen. We know we've got Burnham still waiting in the wings, but he was absolutely spot on his attacks on Farage. You can't allow a guy like Farage, who is, in my view, just a fascist, can't allow him just to ride roughshod over the sort of the things that keep this country together. You know, the despite what Tories believe, you know, most working class people do believe in decent values and reaching out to other people in other parts of the world and helping those who are fleeing oppression. And Farage just encourages people to take a hateful, racist view on these matters. So I was delighted to see Starmer take the fight to Farage, and he's right to call. I mean, today these boats that are coming over the channel, he's calling them Farage's boats. And he's absolutely right. Yeah. They are Farage's boats.
Why?
The reason we're faced with this absolute disaster is that we left the EU and that we're no longer a part of a European-wide policy to take care of the asylum issue. So he's absolutely right to call him Farage's boats. If there's one man in Britain who's go for these votes. One man, it's Farage.
I'm sorry, Mark. That's absolute rubbish. That is genuine nonsense. When Britain was in the EU, and I wasn't a big lever, we weren't in the Schengen area, so we were already had our own border controls. We already had these problems. The fact is, and the figures were out just recently, a 755,000 net increase in the UK population in the most recent 12-month period. That is unsustainable. And it's not right-wing or racist or any of these other things to say that it's unsustainable. And
immigration should be managed.
No one in the Tories was able to get a grip at this, and Labour's made it even worse. They are unable to stop this.
And by the way, I agree with you that it's not racist to say that immigration needs to be managed. And people raising that issue ought to be treated with respect. And by the way, the view that it should be managed should be a mainstream view. I think everyone can agree with that, left and right. But what's clear is that Brexit has not done what it said. Farage said,
no, that's true.
Brexit will come along and there will be no more of that nonsense. There will be no immigration. It'll be gone as an issue because we'll have good old Blighty with big fences around it and no one can get through. That, as with everything Farage says, turned out to be a big fat lie.
Let's step back one moment just to another point that Starmer made in his speech, Mark, where he said we reached a fork in the road. Now, we know that he was alluding to a future either with Reform or Labour, because that's how, as you pointed out, Ben, that's how Starmer chose to frame yesterday. The Tories are nowhere, got a future, either Reform government or Labour government, according to Keir Starmer. But when he says we reached a fork in the road, Mark, up here in Scotland, is one of the directions in that road still another SNP election victory? Has Starmer's speech changed the dial up here in any way?
That, I think the jury's out on that. I think it's fair to say the SNP consistently are very high in the polls. And I think we've said it for a while now. They have that 40%, that you need, who support independence, who think independence is an answer to a lot of the problems that the country has, meaning Scotland. And that remains a stubborn chunk of the electorate that the SNP can, I think, count on. And that's enough to get them through the next election, I think. However, what Starmer's speech did signal was that they are going to pursue the SNP over their record in government.
Yep.
Now, Labour have got a tricky situation on their hands because they've got Reform on the one side eating into what you might call the unionist vote, although I don't think there's really such a thing. But, you've got Reform picking up a lot of maybe Labour voters. So they've got that problem to deal with, and they've got that stubborn 40% who are sticking with the SNP. However, I think what you see with Starmer, with that speech, and I think you'll see it a lot with Sarwar in the coming months, is attack on the SNP's record in government. And I think that's where me and Ben might agree. It's been shite.
Because just before you come in, Ben, one of the things that came out from this conference is pretty clear that the prospect of an Andy Burnham leadership challenge isn't on the cards in the medium term. Starmer will be in charge of Labour, barring some real unforeseen disaster. When Scots go to the polls in May, it's going to be a Starmer UK Labour government. Does that basically mean it's curtains for us, Starmer?
I'm afraid so. I really think it does. I mean, the one thing Starmer's done by making his speech, which sets the tone for the year ahead, all about Farage, all about Reform. Reform are a one-issue party. I mean, I agree. I think it would be a bit of a disaster if they got in as, if Farage became Prime Minister, because they don't really have anything else to. They are just a migration protest party. And Starmer's played right into their hands. He's made it all about migration. And it's an issue that Labour cannot win because they can't take on the judges. They can't leave the ECHR because they have such a backlash from their own members. They're doomed. They cannot win on immigration. Okay. So by making it all about immigration and reform, Starmer's almost accepting that his record's been pretty poor. He made a few points of trying to defend it, but then where do you then go going into the next election? What
in Scotland though, where obviously when we actually hit a campaign, there will be more of a focus on devolved issues. what does an ass Starmer need to do? I mean, he can't just throw the Prime Minister under the bus. I mean, he can distance himself to some degree.
I mean, he's just got to. I think, and again, Mark and I agree on this. The SNP's record's not great. I would say it's pretty terrible in many cases. But at the end of the day, the country still runs. It might not run as well as we'd like it to run, but schools still run. Things still run. And it's kind of a better the devil you know with the SNP. A lot of people go, well, I'm not really happy with how things have gone and the economy's not great and this isn't great. But look what a mess Labour have made of the UK government. What if they do the same at Holyrood? There's no confidence to say things will improve. Okay. Anna Sower needs to sell that message. Things will improve, and he can't point to Starmer.
Just briefly, Mark. I mean, how does Anna Sower still have a hope? I mean, what was his?
I think he's got a hope, and I think those are valid points. I think Labour, even if it has had some achievements, it's not really communicating them very well, and they've been kind of lost in the mix. The first 100 days were disastrous for Labour with the with various things they did, including sort of the winter fuel payment and all that. So, yeah, Labour had to communicate things a lot better. I think Labour do have a good story to tell on workers' rights. I think they've got a good story to tell, hopefully after the next budget, on possibly trying to get tax sorted and get money from the wealthy and get it into public services. So come next April, I think Labour could have a decent story to tell. It's all about the message. It's all about making it very clear that it's about the SNP's record and it's about how Sarwar and Labour could make that better. The difficulties they're going to face are obviously sizable.
I think that's just about enough of the Labour conference for now. As you alluded to, Mark, we obviously have a budget coming down the line next month, which could be painful for everyone. But setting that aside just now, let's talk about a story that has just come out today in the last couple of hours. And that is the news that a company linked to Michelle Mone, the former lingerie entrepreneur and current Tory peer, has been ordered to repay almost £122 million to the UK government for breaching a contract to supply surgical gowns during the COVID pandemic. Now, without going into the details of the wider PPE scandal, let's just focus on the politics of this, because Michelle Mone, will be known to most listeners probably as a businesswoman who was, very media savvy in the early to mid 2000s, really built up her public profile, probably far out of proportion to the size of her company. But then in 2015, David Cameron handed her a peerage. And even at the time, that kind of did raise a few eyebrows.
Of all the crazy things that the Tories have done over the last 20 years, that's got to be in the top 5, and the bar's really high on that one. I mean, what possessed them? Everybody in Scotland, even in the Scottish Tory party, I'm led to believe, were warning David Cameron that this was not a woman to be trusted, that her so-called business achievements were largely a work of fantasy, and that her treatment of workers and her business practices were not necessarily of the highest standard. A good Prime Minister would have taken that on board, but I think he saw the nice headlines. He gets to promote a sort of what he thinks is a sort of go-getting, woman into the Lords. It made him look young and fresh, and it's left him looking like a bit of an Egypt.
There was also around at the time suggestions that she was rewarded for her part in the referendum campaign, which I remember thinking incredible, because I mean, who was paying attention to what Michelle Mone thought on the State of the Union in 2014?
Yeah. I mean, it does seem unlikely. I don't know. I mean, as far as a business goes, Ultimo was a big business. It was a successful lingerie business.
Was it really?
I think it was quite successful.
I don't know, man.
It still had a high profile.
It was high profile for sure.
It was certainly high profile.
Yeah, certainly. The choice of models was certainly always very newsworthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, the record covered there.
She knew how to promote. She knew how to self-promote.
Yeah.
I mean, Cameron, you look at someone like Karen Brady, who's been given a peerage, who's done a great job. So you can see there's obviously a desire to get more younger women, more sort of working class women into the Lords. That's presumably his motivation. He's obviously ignored warnings. It now looks like a bad decision, but at the time, you can see why he did it. You know.
What about now, though? I mean, the SNP today, just let me find the quote, because Pete Wishart, veteran SNP MP, he says that we should now, Michelle Mone should lose her peerage. Now, I should say that is not straightforward. It would actually require an act of Parliament. But without going into that, Pete Wishart makes the point that as a peer, Michelle Mone, in theory, would be entitled to claim very, very generous expenses on, the public's behalf for the rest of her, natural life. Now, Michelle Mone, I think, has said that she's currently on a leave of absence from the House of Lords, but as I understand it, there's absolutely nothing to stop her coming back to the Lords, continuing to vote on legislation, blah, 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 blah. Or what the SNP is saying, is that a fair call? Is it?
I mean, let's forget the chewiness of how the nuts and bolts of how you make it happen. It absolutely should happen. She should be stripped of her title of Baroness Mone of Mayfair. I mean, I don't know what Mayfair's got to do with it. But she should obviously be stripped of that title. She's ripped the taxpayer off, as far as we can tell, allegedly, to the tune of £120 million. Now, most people who did that would be languishing in a cell. And what we find here is she's still a peer of them. She can turn up tomorrow at the Lord if she wants and vote on legislation, on all sorts of things, on taxation, on how we are governed. What it highlights to me perfectly is how the House of Lords itself is an anachronism that should have been abolished around about the same time as the end of the First World War. It serves no useful purpose. We should have a revising chamber at Westminster. It should be a revising chamber full of the brightest and best talents the country has to offer. I mean, not every passing Tory who happens to be
Labour
enough of a shyster to get in.
Labour for years said they were going to create a committee of the regions and nations, was it? And then
a Gordon Brown idea, that
seems to have disappeared. I mean, notable that Pete Wishart is the one who pops up. I know his former party colleague, Joanna Cherry, has named Pete Wishart as one of the two SNP MPs who were desperate to get a seat in the Lords and for the SNP to overturn its ban on accepting peerages. So maybe there's a slight hint of jealousy there from Peter. But no, I agree. It's going to be impossible to strip her of this peerage. They're not going to change the law just to deal with this one. I'm sure she will be made well aware you're not welcome back. So she doesn't claim any money. The only way you get paid for the Lords is by attending.
By turning up.
So she doesn't get any money just for. But she gets.
That's right. A lot of them turn up, sign in, then head off to their favourite club for the day and get their £300.
Maybe a spot of lunch, before they head off. But you're right. It's like £300 a day just by turning up.
It's not. I mean, it's nice work if you get it, but then they work hard. You like George Fuchs.
Not as good as our expenses.
Well, once upon a time.
Okay, I think we can leave Baroness Mone of Mayfair. Whether or not that title was linked to the brand of cigarettes, I don't know.
I was thinking the magazine, but that's maybe going to be too far.
On a completely unrelated note, at the Scottish Parliament today, Labour, using one of its opposition debates, will be talking about the issue of mobile phones in schools. Now, this is a big topic conversation, not just in Scotland or the UK. Indeed, we were talking earlier, Ben, about it happening in America. Now, screen time, we probably all spend too much time on our phones, but, when you're in a classroom, what to learn, is it helpful if you're glued to a screen? And obviously, there are other issues to consider. Here at the Daily Record, we've had a long-running campaign raising awareness of youth violence, and particularly incidents of youth violence in schools or near schools, which are filmed by other youngsters and then shared on social media. And then an incident that's maybe been seen by 20 people in person then suddenly gets shown to 10,000, 500,000 people, etc., etc. But it seems to be a bit of a division on this, because Labour are quite keen, but the Scottish Government have pushed back and said, well, it's not really up to Holyrood to kind of come down on this legislation. It's really up to head teachers. It's not like the SNP would get involved in local authority matters. So, Ben, what do you think? I mean,
I think it's an excellent idea. I think it's a really good policy. I think mobile phones should be banned in schools. It's the evidence all points towards it being a good thing.
How does it work though? Do you take them off the kids when they turn up at 9 a.m, giving them back at half
there's a school in Edinburgh where that's exactly what they do. They drop them in. In fact, I think there are some schools that have a special pouch that you put it in, which means it kind of get a signal. And that's it. The phone never interrupts their school day. Now that would be a real boon to the learning of these kids. And let's be honest, it's a lot of the time it's working class kids in big state schools where the teachers have maybe not got the will nor the ability to really crack down on the mobile phone use. By taking that out of the equation, it would be such a boost to the education of most of our young people. The record's been running, as you know, in Our Kids Our Future campaign for some time, highlighting this trend for filming violent acts on cameras and then of children being battered and then posting it for likes on social media. Social media giants do nothing or very little to stop it. It'd be a massive advance in the fight against bullying if these phones were taken out of the equation, because a lot of it is done for the social media likes. So it seems to me to be one of these things where any sensible person would get behind it. Labour are doing exactly the right thing. Why? I can't work out why the SNP have come out against it.
I mean, it might be because it would set a precedent. If they give a sort of nationwide position on phones in schools, it gives the lie to a lot of the previous comments where ministers say, look, we can't order schools to. Just this week, Jenny Gilruth said, look, I can't tell schools that they must have single-sex toilets. It's up to each individual school. This is just guidance.
It's such a cop-out, eh?
It's such a cop-out.
The truth is, they could make it. She's maybe right that legislatively it would be difficult to force schools to do anything, but you can make that guidance absolutely unequivocal crystal clear. She could do it on schools' toilets. I mean, the law says there has to be separate toilets for schools, but it's not mandatory, she says. You know, Gilruth, it's like, what are you talking about?
So just
it is mandatory, it's the law. And they could do the same with phones. They could make it, not the law, but they could make it very strong guidance.
Yeah, impossible to get out of this guidance without directly going against the government.
Yeah, exactly. But Jenny Gilruth said on the subject, I have been clear that I will support any head teacher who decides to implement a ban on mobile phones. But as you kind of allude to there, Mark, I mean, that just leaves it open to schools where maybe there is a very energetic head teacher who's like, right, I'm going to set out on a crusade to, raise standards and maybe more ambivalent.
But also they're going to come up against parents.
Yes,
because there will be a lot of parents who will say, our lad needs his phone because what if he needs to ring me after school, or what if he needs to? I need to send a message to say, go to your granny's after school. So parents might object. I don't think they will. I think parents will back this. I think it will be.
Is this another case of the SNP being a bit scared of their own shadow and not want to do something that they fear might backfire on them? And it's clearly the right thing to do.
I mean, I do wonder whether just the women election plays a part in it, that they think that this is a debate to be had on another day. And you're right about the parents who maybe would kick up a fuss about it. They don't want to anger them right at this moment in time.
Don't do anything controversial over the next 9 months. Don't scare the horses.
But I find it slightly weird myself. I mean, I was when I started at high school, no one had a mobile phone, but then by the time I left,
phones?
Everybody had them.
Aye, yes.
But they were still, the Nokia 3310s, which, you couldn't film anyone having a scrap in the playground.
No, but you could send a nasty text.
You could send a nasty text,
and you could. What was that worm game that you used to have?
Snake.
That could distract you from your lessons. I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Well,
I think that just about covers everything here on Planet Holyrood for today. So just want to say thanks very much to Mark, thanks very much to Ben for joining me, and also thanks to Daryl Devine from the Daily Records radio video team who has produced this episode. And I'm duty bound to say that you can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel, and don't forget to follow us on Instagram and on TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast. So that's all for now. Paul will be back next week, and take care for now. Cheerio.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.